answers. That said, I would like to welcome to PNP Live John Dean. I'm sure a lot of you may know who Mr. Dean is. Mr. Dean has served as White House counsel for President Nixon from 1970 to 1973. During the Watergate scandal, his Senate testimony helped lead to Nixon's resignation. Mr. Dean has written about Watergate in his New York Times bestsellers Blind Ambition and The Nixon Defense, What He Knew and When He Knew It. Among his other books are the national bestsellers Worse Than Watergate and Conservatives Without Conscience. A retired investment banker, Mr. Dean is now a columnist, commentator, and teacher in a continuing legal education program for attorneys, the Watergate CLE. He is a regular political and legal commentator on CNN News, among other venues. And without further ado, Mr. Dean, the floor is yours, sir.
I thank you. And I thank everybody who is assembled and torn themselves away from the Republican convention. I didn't realize I would be probably not going head to head with Trump, since we're going to end this at 8 o'clock sharp. So those of you who are clamoring to get to the television will be able to get back. But meanwhile, I'm going to go into shared screen. I don't really like talking heads, so I think that'd be much more interesting if I go through a few slides and give you a little overview of what I've done. Isn't that a neat cover? Anyway, recently I participated in a program with a fellow I know, Larry Diamond of Stanford, who is part of the voter group study, which has been an ongoing 3-year project. And they have been examining the attitudes of authoritarianism in America, which I find fascinating given the fact I have been writing about it. So when this report came out in June, I did a program with Larry, and there's really some stunning numbers that they produced. They don't really define authoritarianism, but they do find that Americans overwhelmingly love their democracy, but that overwhelming love masks some really troubling truths. Let's go through just a couple of them. 1 in 3 Americans say a strong leader is a good way to run a country. 1 in 4 say they'd favor army rule in America. Fewer than half Americans would object to a president acting unilaterally without, that should be, it's a typo on my part, without constitutional or congressional authority. And 41% say it's appropriate for a president to act unilaterally simply because, quote, a large majority of Americans believe he should act. Now, I don't know if this is fully a process of the personality of the people who are quizzed, or a lack of education, or what, but I certainly recognize these people from my own studies. Authoritarianism, we could spend the whole session talking about what it is and isn't. There is a political science definition in the Oxford English Dictionary you find online that talks about the enforcement or advocacy of strict obedience to authority at the expense of personal freedom. Well, that doesn't tell you a whole lot. The way we, my co-author and collaborator and I have addressed it, is authoritarianism is a relationship of the followers to a leader. Stripped to its essential, authoritarianism happens when followers submit too much to the authorities in their life. So what does that mean? What's too much? Well, lying, cheating, stealing, in some instances will result in loss of faith in an authoritarian leader. In other cases, it won't. Ruling by undermined democracy, which was my principal interest, in some instances will result in the followers not being attracted to the leader, or vice versa, being attracted. There are a lot of books in politics in prose for anyone who really wants to delve into the nature and workings of authoritarianism. One of my favorites is Hannah Arendt's The Origins of Totalitarianism. A quick read is Tim Snyder's On Tyranny, which many of you probably have already looked at because it is brisk. Jacek Monk does a nice job in The People versus Democracy. I kind of enjoyed The Dictator's Handbook. Great subtitle, why bad behavior is almost always good politics. And of course, there's How Democracies Die, which is a very telling and thorough examination of what can happen when authoritarianism starts to dominate. My approach, which I really have been looking at authoritarianism for about a little over a decade, and it was prompted initially with this book, which was an effort to find the answer to a question the late Senator Barry Goldwater was curious. His son and I are lifetime friends. We were roommates in prep school, and the senator, after he retired, really wanted to understand why the religious right had taken over the Republican Party, or was in the process of doing so. He was very troubled by it, by no less than Jerry Falwell Sr., who is his son, of course, back in the news. And he said, John, I would love to find the answer to that. And so we actually started the project together, came up with the title based on his well-known book, The Conscience of a Conservative, kind of spinning that around because he didn't think that the conservatism he was seeing had any conscience at all, particularly their inability to negotiate or compromise, and he thought it was going to wreck the Republican Party and the government. Well, I ended up digging around, and what I found was there is a whole long-standing study of authoritarian personalities. And I really got to the chief architect of that study, and this was well before Trump. But Trump has again prompted me to dig back in. So before I get too deep into my prior study, let's just look a little bit at why I got back into this whole thing. It happened during the Trump campaign. You can tell I'm not familiar with this slideshow, which I just assembled this afternoon. Trump prompted me to start wondering why reporters weren't writing about that body of science I discovered back in 2006, 2007, that was at that time about 40 years of age. And to my amazement, there was only, during the campaign, there was only one serious look at authoritarianism during the Trump campaign. And it was done by Amanda Taub, who's now with the New York Times. She was then with Vox. And you can see the title of her story, The Rise of American Authoritarianism. And she says, as her subtitle, a niche group of political scientists may have uncovered what's driving Donald Trump's ascent. What they found has implications that go well beyond 2016. That is for sure. But when you dig into her article, if you know anything about this body of science, you'll find that she looked at a very narrow basis. There is a 4-question child rearing survey that has been taken for a number of years now, and it shows a disposition towards authoritarianism. And having worked in this area, I knew there was much more to it. But yet, as I say, even this surface study didn't get very far. When Trump was being accused by his opponents, people like Lindsey Graham, of being a demagogue, Ted Cruz certainly didn't mince any words on his demagoguery, and even Stephen Hawking came out and called him a demagogue. It was kind of sealed when the New York Times actually hired a number of experts to come in, go through all of his campaign material, and determine, yes, this man is a demagogue. And ever since, they have not hesitated. They don't use the A word, authoritarian, very often, although it has increasingly come back in. Bernie Sanders, of course, used it during the Democratic convention and just flat out called Trump an authoritarian. Anyway, I just didn't understand why reporters were ignoring this body of science. And the person who had helped me so much with the Conservatives Without Conscience was a psychology professor at the University of Manitoba up in Winnipeg, a fellow named Bob Altmaier, who is on the right here. And he had devoted his lifetime to studying authoritarian personalities. And he, as I say, was very helpful with the Conservatives Without Conscience. And I asked him what he thought. I actually wrote a couple columns. And around July, I kind of wrote of 2017, wrote my last column on the subject and really just interviewed Bob Altmeyer to get his science on the record, because I thought it was important that hopefully somebody would discover it. Well, nobody did. And it has just gone on. And there, as I say, there are some very respected scientists who spent their life trying to understand these personalities. They break down into a few categories, the personalities. The leader types are the social dominators, people who score high or show evidence of behavior that fits in the social dominance orientation scale. That's a rather recent phase of the study, about a little over a decade old. It was just coming to the fore when I wrote my book, Conservatives Without Conscience. But at that time, I was more interested in the followers anyway. But this science has emerged much more. There's the other branch, the type of followers are right-wing authoritarians. And they score high on a test or show evidence that parallels that test that really has been around about 40 years. I will come back to it in a moment. The third type of personality is known as the double high. These people, I looked for some sort of representation of these personalities, and this seems pretty markedly accurate, because these people have the worst traits of all these personalities. They seem to pick up the worst. So here they are. You got three different types of personalities: social dominators, authoritarian followers, and double highs. Let's dig a little deeper. Social domination orientation scale. It's a dominating personality, which we all encounter along the way somewhere, from family to school to friends to what have you. No one gets very far in life without knowing what a dominating personality is. But they also have the quality of they actually want to be dominating personality. They seek to dominate. They're also people who feel strongly that there should not be equality. In other words, they thrive on inequality. George Wallace is fairly representative of that type of personality. And as I said, they're desirous of personal power. There is an epitome of a man desirous of personal power. Finally, the fourth establishing criteria is they're amoral. They have these four consistent personality traits, and they can fit into this slot. So dominating personality, oppose equality, desirous of personal power, and amoral. We've had a number of presidents who actually fit this definition: Andrew Jackson, Woodrow Wilson, and Richard Nixon. I happened to work for the last authoritarian president, and that's obviously what got my interest in this as well. When I was talking with the late Senator Goldwater about it, and that's where that all kind of meshed together with the religious right and his dispute with that influence on his movement. And finally, Donald Trump rather conspicuously fits the definition as well. There are also traits that when these people are tested, that they openly reveal about themselves. Here's just a small sample of some of the traits that have consistently come up in the testing. They're intimidating and bullying. And I actually prepared these long before Trump arrived on the scene back in 2006 and 7. They're faintly hedonistic, they're vengeful, they're pitiless, they're exploitive, they're manipulative, they're dishonest. It is not a barking dog, it is my telephone, which I'll turn off. They cheat to win. They're highly prejudiced. They're mean-spirited, militant, and nationalistic. If somebody doesn't take the test, there are dangers with typographies, but also when somebody consistently walks like a duck, talks like a duck, you can be pretty sure it is a duck. And that's sort of the basis. A lot of this work is done because you cannot expect many of these people to go in and ever submit to a test or be honest in taking such a test. A social dominator is really something of a fool on a soapbox without followers. And so the followers are the key to understanding these people in full. We have had a long study of authoritarian followers, and I'm going to trace it just briefly here. It goes back to the World War II era when Hitler and Mussolini attracted huge crowds, not just those that they imposed their will on, but those who voluntarily went along with their program and did so seemingly willingly. What happened is, as a result of that activity, a number of scientists in East Germany and just generally in the area escaped the Nazis and ended up in Berkeley, where they pursued their study to try to understand why would anybody really succumb willingly to the power of a Hitler or Mussolini and tolerate it. And could it happen in America? It was a question they drew their work together and in 1951 published a book called The Authoritarian Personality. It's been a controversial book. It was in part based on Freudian psychology, which did not hold up very well, but it was the seed of the study that continued, that got over the Freudian aspects and began just drilling down and exploring these personalities in a highly scientific way that we draw from. It really is the study of the authoritarian follower and the social dominators. But let's drill down and look at the right-wing authoritarians, because that's the larger number of people. The social dominators are many, but they, in comparison to all their followers, are the few. So let's look briefly at the followers. This is my checklist, not yours. They are submissive to authority. And I think that what we noticed in our study is these people seem to find each other at Trump rallies as we took a deep dive into those rallies. Hang on, I'm looking for my notes. They're both men and women, whereas social dominators tend to be men. The followers can be both men and women. So they are submissive to authority. I couldn't find a very good picture of people who were submissive to authority, but I saw this poor fella who is totally submissive to authority. Sorry about that. They are aggressive on behalf of that authority. There's a very good example at a Trump rally of somebody being very aggressive on behalf of the authority that they believe in. They are also very conventional in their manner. These are the key defining traits. In other words, the submission to authority, the aggression on behalf of authority, and conventionality are the defining traits. But in testing these people, there's much more to them when you add different personality tests. They're typically highly religious. They have moderate to little education. They trust untrustworthy authorities. They're highly prejudiced, particularly against homosexuals, women, and followers of religions other than their own. They're mean-spirited. They're narrow-minded. They're intolerant. They're bullies. They're zealous. They're dogmatic. They're uncritical of chosen authorities. Their own authorities. They have very little critical thinking skill. They're hypocritical. They're inconsistent and contradictory. In fact, in chapters 5 through 10 of the book, we do a very deep dive into how these people show remarkable abilities to hold inconsistent positions on policy issues and and their beliefs that can absolutely be contradictory, and they don't see it. It just doesn't affect them that way. They are prone to panic easily. They're highly self-righteous. They're moralistic. They're strict disciplinarians. They're severely punitive. They demand loyalty and return it. And they have little self-awareness. This doesn't define every one of them. The checklist I've just gone through, it is a group profile of what they can have. It can be very different and distinguishing when you get down to different individuals. So I'm not saying that every Trump follower has those qualities. I noticed that picture certainly represented to me their conventionality, how conventional these people are in their style and manner. Now, most of the testing we relied on had been done by Altmaier and other scientists. In fact, as a collaborator, I learned when you work with a established scientist, he doesn't want to see, as I was sending him on a steady basis, other scientists I found with similar findings and what have you, but he preferred to stick with his own science. He said he knew it. He relied on it. He trusted it. He knew his groups and didn't really want to lace the book with other science. But all along, we recognized that what we were going to do at one point, because I happened to have a friendly relationship with the man who founded and operates the Monmouth University Polling Institute, Pat Murray. I had asked Pat when he raised a question about his own polling, and I happened to mention that I was considering a book on authoritarian personalities because they seem to be so influential and key to whether Trump would or would not be elected, and then how he would govern or not govern. And he said this was something he was interested in as well. So I said, would you consider doing a poll for us or a survey? And he said, I would. So after we had pretty well ground out the basic issues that we thought were applicable to the Trump base, as I say, relying on, relatively speaking, smaller samples, we decided to do a nationwide test of that material through the Monmouth Polling Institute. We did that in the fall of last year, and I can only tell you it blew away my collaborator. It was for him a eureka moment because it kind of validated his life's work. In fact, in spades, it was much more telling than he ever could have anticipated. It was an online test. We had a core group of about 230,000 people, from which a sample of just under 1,990 were selected. We skewed it a little bit towards the Republican end because we wanted to be sure we understood Trump's base. That's one of the key things we wanted to be able to appreciate. In my more blunt phrase to my collaborator, I said, you can't beat them if you don't know who they are. And I thought these people needed to be beat. The polling showed far more double highs in the United States than we could have ever dreamed. And we've also, it's very clear that the authoritarians have migrated almost in whole to the Republican Party. The Republican Party is solidly authoritarian today. It is both at the state and federal and national level, excuse me. So that was and probably the grimmest finding was that what Trump has really assembled is a coalition of the most prejudiced Americans. His base is truly the most biased people you can find out there. Now, can there be anything done with these people? Will they ever see the light? Will they ever change their ways? Not likely. A few people, Altmaier in his work has found, when they discover how prejudiced they are, they're not happy to learn that. And they will try to deal with their prejudice and not want to be seen as prejudiced. And this is the beginning of how they can turn away from these authoritarian stances they take and take as the only way to proceed. So that is a fringe group and not many of them. The bottom line is the only way to deal with them is to overwhelmingly defeat them at the poll. They are highly aggressive in working to get their goals accomplished. They will be as tough as any group as you can ever be opposed to. They are a minority, though. We don't have exact head count, but it's roughly somewhere between hardcore of 30% to maybe as high as 35%. When you look at Trump's approval ratings and you see how they fluctuate on, say, Nat Silver's polling compilation of polls, there you see that it varies between 44%, and it stayed in that zone. He never seems to go below that, but never much above. And those are pretty much, that is the coalition. And it's a coalition of white, low-educated men and evangelicals and born-agains. Those are the largest, the evangelicals and born-agains. So those are the core. That's the base. That's why Trump is playing to them. That's why the fear and loathing that is now coming out of this campaign. And somebody like a Trump doesn't go through the science to understand what attracts these people. Maybe some of his aides have now, and they've figured out who these people are, but we doubt that. It's just intuitive for a demagogue to know and recognize who it is that he's appealing to and how he attracts that person. He has some of these own feelings himself, and he can push them out there to attract others. So with those general remarks and opening remarks, we're about halfway through the hour. Let's see if we can't entertain some questions. Let me set this back up to out of the share screen.
Alrighty. All right. We got some questions.
Your volume is very low for me, but maybe my volume is turned down.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So we already have some questions that were coming in.
Well, as I told you, the audience is very quiet.
So here's someone wants to know, this is coming from Chaz Miller. He would like to know if you can explain the double highs again and exactly how do they fit in?
Yes, the double highs are as Altmaier says, it was great creativity in science that got the label double high. They're double highs because they test high as social dominators and right-wing authoritarians. Now, that seems an inconsistent position because a right-wing authoritarian is somebody who submits to authority, whereas the social dominator wants to dominate. So how do you, it's almost like an oxymoron. But what happens is when these people, these social dominators take the right-wing authoritarian test, it appears that they are taking the test and viewing the test as if they were in charge and they were dominating. And this is how they would like people and think people should respond to these tests. And they also, as a result, tend to score very high on many of the other very negative personality tests, the con man test, the madman test. There are a lot of these other tests that these people have been given in controlled situations. So how do we know somebody who hasn't taken the test is a double high? Well, trust me, I have no trouble spotting them. Mark Meadows is a classic to me. He was a big fish in a small pond when he was first in the Tea Party, then into the Freedom Caucus. And now, however, and he was a very dominating figure in those organizations. But now he's not the top fish. He's down there as chief of staff. But that's what double highs do. They will submit when they can enhance their own power. This is why, and it's not only necessarily direct power, but just some people will join an organization because they think that organization enhances their ability to accomplish what they think is important. And as I say, their dominating trend is seeking, they're dominators, they seek personal power, they demand inequality, and they're totally immoral in their pursuit of these things. So that hopefully gives you, I'm trying to do in sound bites what we roll out in chapters to give you a little bit better feel of this.
Oh wow, okay. Open the floodgates of questions here. Okay. So this is one from, well, I don't know if it's fair to call it one. I think it's actually like two. But Hal asked pretty early on. First, let's do the first part of his question. He says, to what extent do you think cynicism and corruption play a role in the success of authoritarian leaders?
Was the first word cynicism?
Yes, cynicism
Okay.
and corruption.
I think they both play roles. The authoritarian personality, you know, what we did in the book, not knowing that Mary Trump was going to write the book she did, we went through the record, and it's amazing how much we found in the existing public record about Trump's childhood, which is very sparsely reported. Actually, some of the best reporting done on it, other than his biographers, to whom he opened up a little bit. He doesn't like to talk about his childhood, but Altmaier, as a student of this, says you can't study and understand authoritarian personalities unless you understand their childhood and their relationship with their parents. And we were able to find in the record a lot of the things that Mary Trump later confirmed. She was not looking at him, Trump, as to see if he was an authoritarian figure, as we were, but rather whether what explained his general narcissistic, corrupt, manipulative behavior. But I've only drawn a broad picture of these people, and Trump does. We did find in the public record a lot of the things, some that Mary didn't seem to know, and I would be curious how they fit into her thinking on her uncle. So there is material out there in the public record. I was saying, I didn't finish the sentence, that the best investigative work on this was done by a team that was put together by the Washington Post after it was clear he was going to go to the White House. They assembled a team, and they went back, and while they missed the guy who purportedly took the SAT for Trump, they found a lot of other people, and that was valuable to assemble and understand who he is and why he is. And the short answer, it's his father, as Mary said. The father was a real SOB. And so this is the man in the White House has been starved for love for a long time.
Well, that's actually kind of sad.
It is.
And the second part of Hal's question, if that's fair to say, is how can post-Trump administrations, whenever that comes to pass, create a cleansed government that convinces people to support alternatives to far-right policies?
You know, one of the things that's going to whatever happens in this election, I don't know. We're not good tea leaf readers. This book isn't involved in sensation or prediction, but rather explanation, because we don't think it can be dealt with if it's not explained. To understand these people is vital to deal with them. And one of the things people should understand is they're not going away. If Trump is defeated, they're just going to be looking for their next leader. And you can rest very assured that that leader has been watching, potential leader, has been watching Donald Trump. And the next one will probably be a little sharper and a little bit more knowledgeable about the way the government works than Donald Trump, who doesn't appear to me to have even a good newspaper knowledge of the ways of Washington and the way the machine works. He's learning, and that's why he's becoming increasingly dangerous, because he's now figured out how he can bludgeon his way along, and he's got some enablers to help him. But the answer is the only way to solve this problem is at the ballot box, to make this behavior unacceptable behavior. There is, like post-Watergate, post-Trump, there is going to be an outpouring of reform legislation. All the norms that he's ignored, all of the rules he has broken that were often informal, or they're codified, but not, there's no sanction on them. That's going to all change. That's going to all change because no one thought that anyone would ever get in there and be the blunderbuss and manipulator that he clearly is. That's the danger of a second term. It'll only get worse. But as I say, there'll be a lot of reforms. It's a shame a lot of this will have to be codified and made criminal. The Hatch Act, you know, there are very few real serious teeth in the Hatch Act, and we're watching it being violated every night of this convention. I got to say, for Richard Nixon, he respected the office he held, and he would have never done the things that Trump is doing today. He would have never used the White House in the way it's being used as a theatrical backdrop for a political convention. Nixon was somebody who wore white shirts because he thought they were presidential. Well, Trump wears white shirts most days, but he is certainly not presidential.
Okay. Well, since you just brought up Nixon in this last answer, Joe Proctor asked, well, first, she wanted to say she considers you to be a hero of our time.
She can ask anything.
So kind of a two-part question here. One, did you like Nixon initially? And towards the end, how did you feel once everything, I guess, was over?
You know, I, as White House counsel, when I took the job at 31 years of age and was replacing a man who was many years my senior, John Ehrlichman. Ehrlichman was moving over to become an assistant to the president. And I knew Ehrlichman was giving up the title, but I didn't really think he was giving up the job. I know that's the fact today. What happened is he gave up all the grunt work of the office and gave that to me. And he remained White House counsel for all practical purposes as far as advising Nixon. I don't have any dealings other than group dealings with Nixon until Watergate is well along in its way. I'm there almost 1,000 days before I even start seeing the president. And then I'll have 39 conversations with him where I try to deal with him and deal with Watergate and try to educate him and find out what he knows and doesn't know. And he couldn't be more gracious with me. He writes awfully nice things about me in his diary on several occasions. Now, what happens to the relationship is, I think he's in trouble. I think my superiors, Haldeman and Ehrlichman, the chief of staff, and my former predecessor as White House counsel, are in trouble. I think we're all in trouble. And I'm trying to make sure the president can get out of it. And the only way to do it is to clean house. So it's a fairly awkward situation. And the end of the game, of course, is when they decide after I break rank that the only way to deal with me is to make me the scapegoat. I try to tell them they've selected the wrong person. And after that, it's just open warfare. And we know, thank God, those conversations were all recorded.
Oh, that was good. Okay. I'm seeing this to some extent, more or less. But in short, let's go with this version of it. Well, let's stick with this one first. Is there a way to, I guess, reason or otherwise convince or talk to any of these individuals where you would be persuasive? You know, these personality types you described.
Yes, the social dominator type, when you tell him, and it's generally him, there's very few hers, that they are prejudiced, they'll say, fine, I'm proud of that. They'll actually often wear it as a badge. If you tell a right-wing authoritarian follower that they're scoring as amongst the most prejudiced Americans, they could be well distressed by that information and say, well, how do I deal with that? Not all of them will, but a few of them might. So yes, some of them can be reasoned with. Some of them don't even recognize, because of their inability to critically think on a lot of these issues. They've been told how to think all their life, many of them. This is particularly true amongst the born again and the fundamentalist. And they have rote answers that they have developed that they don't really need to think through. And so when they find themselves in situations where they are for the first time thinking, sometimes they will address themselves anew and realize that the course they were on is not the course that really they want to follow. So yes, they can, some of them, but this is a difficult road to hoe. More likely, the only way I see that it's going to be dealt with in the short term is a tsunami election. Some of the polling we did, for example, showed that these people, up to 29% of them, of his core, would tolerate him staying in office, notwithstanding the Constitution. Another, about almost 20%, are not sure how to answer on that. So 50% of them, theoretically, might well tolerate his misbehavior post-election. That's a troubling prospect.
Yeah. And so what you just said kind of leads to this one. I think this may have been from Ira. It says, if you look at age demographics of the base, if you're aware of what that looks like, is there any evidence that essentially this will be passed on? Will younger generation kind of pick up the baton of these beliefs and then become the new personality types for these?
We don't know, science doesn't know if this is nature or nurture. Altmaier, who has worked in this area for a very long time and tested literally thousands of these personalities, thinks it's a pretty clear combination of both, with the parenting having probably an outsized influence, but on somebody who has a predisposition towards that type of behavior. So yes, there's a high probability that this kind of behavior and personality can be passed on. There is the hope of education, however, since one of the pillars of his coalition are white men with little education. Those are people, hopefully the next generation will be better educated and less inclined to respond in an authoritarian fashion.
So here's one from Laura. She simply asked, do you think America is doomed? Or in the case Trump is reelected, what can be done?
Do I think America's doomed? No, I don't. I'm an optimist by nature. I've been into some pretty deep doom situations myself personally, and seen that there is another side. There is life after. So no, I don't think we're doomed. Is it a serious problem? You bet. That's why I did this book. I had to go outside my normal publishing house because they were already backed up with books and said there's no way they could crash it through. I called a person who actually is a former Washington figure, Peter Osnos. His son, Evan, is a writer for the New Yorker and interviewed me several times. So I called Evan to see how I could get a hold of his father when I was trying to figure out how to get this book published. And Evan put me in touch with his dad, and his dad no longer runs the free press, but was able to tell me and point me to a house, Melville House, where I am now, that it has just done a super job of getting it edited, ready for publication, and crashing it out and getting it in stores for this week. So I am optimistic, and that's why I did the book, because people need to understand how serious this is, and that the remedy is most likely getting not only yourself out to vote, but everybody you know to make sure they've voted, and making sure we have an overwhelming victory to put these people, as I have said less than flatteringly, under a rock somewhere until they realize this behavior just doesn't work in a democracy. So that's the remedy, and it's not going to go away, though. They're not going to disappear quickly, and there is a tremendous price to pay for a democracy, and that is vigilance. It's going to have to not be just one election, it's going to have to be several, or they will come in and take over the system, and it will not be a system that probably most of the people listening to this this podcast or this broadcast or this whatever we call it today, this Zoom session, will be happy with.
Understood. So here's the first question we received. And I think I probably know the answer, but you speak pretty frankly, and Linda wants to know, do you fear reprisals?
Well, I've been speaking pretty frankly all my life, so both within the system and without the system. I was listening to you read my books earlier, and I was thinking when you read Worse Than Watergate, how I used that title too early. I used it to describe the secret presidency of George Bush and Dick Cheney, and what prompted me to use that title too early was when they started engaging in war crimes. And I don't think Richard Nixon in his darkest day would have gone there. So that again was a dark chapter. But it's worse now. It's maybe the title, the other alternative title was far worse than Watergate. And but I didn't go there.
So here's a question by Marjorie. And, you know, of course, if you touched on this in your book, feel free to expand. But she wants to know, how does what's happening here compare with what has or what can happen in other countries? Or is there any difference?
There are some of the books I mentioned that address authoritarianism deal with that question and show how the way that we lose democracy today is not the way it happened historically. It is that the people willingly give it up. And it's the personalities I'm talking about who want a strong man figure. It's those polling numbers I read at the outset who said, you know, the 1 in 4 who say, let's let the military run the country, or the 40% that say, let's let the president do whatever he wants to with or without congressional approval. This is partially a problem of education and the need for civic education, but it is also a disposition that people must understand. It's just not acceptable. They have to be sophisticated enough to know that the rights that they love and the freedoms they enjoy aren't going to last if they don't get a better grip on what works and what doesn't, and how our system really works. The fact that Donald Trump probably could not get I am convinced Donald Trump could not get through a civil service exam. He couldn't get hired as a post person. He is so ignorant about government. And to have somebody like that running the country has been truly frightening. And it's part of the problem.
So I'm getting a few people are asking something in this vein anyway. A lot of people are wondering if there will be some, like an escalation of violence. Some people are using the term like another civil war, but essentially, you know, what if, whether it be from a Trump loss or something, do you think that this can escalate to something?
Well, we all certainly hope not. In the polling we did, there was a line that post-election that even the deepest Trump enthusiast doesn't want to go. They don't want to totally abandon the Constitution. While they'll give a president a lot of license, and they are persuadable on some of these issues outright, I don't see that. I think that the Biden people are really smart in preparing for all contingencies. I think a number of the agencies that the president is probably not even aware of, and thankfully not, because he probably would halt it, are preparing for that prospect. I'm sure the Defense Department is, other national security agencies are, but the intelligence community certainly realizes we have a president who himself is a threat to the country and the country's well-being, and we're in a very dangerous time. That's why the tsunami election is so important. If he is just overwhelmingly defeated, then it's not going to be an issue. He'll get the message. If it's narrow and people say home, well, I don't care, my vote's not going to make any difference, then we're going to be in trouble. So that's why a big election is important.
And let me first apologize to people because we're getting close to the end time. I know a lot of questions are still out here. I'll try to.
Well, a lot of those questions will be answered by the book.
Indeed. Which, again, you can click on the link to go purchase from the Politics and Prose website. I'll drop that in the chat one more time. But kind of going off of one thing you just said there with your last response, with Trump, Janu asked, how do you think he would react to a loss, I guess, considering his personality?
Well, I don't think Donald Trump will ever accept a loss. In fact, he will, if he does lose, as we know, he wouldn't even accept a win where he lost 3 million votes to the popular vote to Hillary Clinton. He claimed it had been rigged, and it was a bunch of immigrants who voted illegally in California and elsewhere. Well, of course, he convened a commission to deal with this fraudulent problem, and that commission ended up going out of business because it wasn't true. So he will never accept the loss. He can't. It's the core of his personality that he is always a winner. He cannot accept any fault. He can't accept any mistakes. He has no ability to deal with those issues. So it will be tough for him. He needs therapy more than any president we've ever had, and it will be very tough. But it will also be bracing, and let him do all the name calling he can. But the office, you understand, leaves him under the Constitution. While he can fight and try to tie it up, that will likely result in Nancy Pelosi becoming president under the existing law. So we'll see what he does. But as I say, I think if there is a tsunami vote, what's he going to do? He has no choice. It doesn't matter if he stays in the White House or not. That will just embarrass himself even more because he's no longer president. They can start charging him rent. The absurdity, well, to me, the absurdity of his presidency has been deeply troubling. Nixon was smart. Trump is not. So that's that. That we had a very intelligent man who made and pushed the system. We have now a very unintelligent man who is pushing the system, and that's why he's much more difficult to deal with. And the other thing is he knows no shame. Nixon actually did know shame and felt it, whereas Trump seems not to have any, it doesn't register with him.
Oh, I'm not sure if you would know this one, but Marjorie.
We've got time for maybe one more, I see.
Yeah, I'm gonna.
Because I know all these people don't want to miss the, we've already lost 3 people who obviously rushed off to see the convention.
So here's one from Marjorie. She says, is there anyone in the White House today you think who would be a hero like you were?
And tell him the way it is. You know, so far, the only person that is given any inkling of some understanding of the broader picture is the First Lady. She seems to understand. We don't know what this book that's coming out by her BFF is going to say, but apparently she had some rather candid remarks to her girlfriend about Donald, and she's somebody who might well stand up and tell him, you know, and say, be real. The other kids, because their inheritance is based on remaining in the will, they're not going to do it. Mark Meadows should have the spine, but maybe not the disposition. The other people in the White House counsel's office, they showed their colors at the Senate trial. It was phenomenal. I recently was talking and did a program with Norm Eisen, who was counsel for the Judiciary Committee and on the floor of the Senate during the trial, and was flabbergasted and actually wrote in his book that he couldn't believe that the White House counsel was on the floor of the Senate in front of the Chief Justice of the United States lying. And I had the same, I was covering that for CNN at the time, had a similar reaction and happened to call one of the former DC Bar Counsel and said, is anybody filing anything with these people? And this lawyer said to me, he said, John, this is so far beyond ethics problems, it's directly criminal law problems. But the Attorney General is not going to do anything about it. So what are we going to do about it? So you know, the end of the road and the solution is the election. The American people have the check on this president. And that's why I did this book, so I can give them some information as to how important it is that they vote not only this time, but the next time, because of the people who are attracted to Donald Trump and his ilk. So with that, I think maybe to get people to honor our time, I want to thank everybody for coming out and tuning in. I hope you find the book a good read. It was an interesting write as a collaboration. It is solid science, and we didn't know what you'll know in advance is that everything we write in the early chapters is confirmed by what we got in chapter 10 with the Monmouth poll. And then the last 2 chapters, we start writing about the implications of all this. And some of these, you know, some are encouraging, some are discouraging, but hopefully all of them are honest. So I thank Politics in Prose. It's one of my favorite DC independents. And it's always a pleasure to visit with the Politics in Prose audience. So I thank you all.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Dean. I look forward to picking up your book, Authoritarian Nightmare. Once again, available for purchase on Politics in Prose website. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. And we look forward to hearing from you again, Mr. Dean. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you all.